We are now joined by Stephen Brunt in our Sportsnet studios in Toronto. Now today we are going to talk about Stephen's life as one of Canada's top sports broadcasters. And first of all, what attracted you to this type of work? Although, did it not all start with rock and roll?
Yeah, it did sort of. It's kind of a circuitous route, Wilder. I didn't come into sports journalism or sports writing via a straight line. Like a lot of failed musicians, I became a music writer early in my life, and then I was in news. I worked in hard news at the Globe and Mail, newspaper for a long time before I wound up in sports. And yeah, no, I came into sports because I thought it was a place I could tell stories. You know, tell stories about almost anything. You can reach almost any subject through sport. And that's what drew me to it originally.
All right, so speaking of the Globe and Mail then, what was that part of your career like?
Oh, it was terrific. You know, it's the best newspaper in the country. I think it still is. You know, newspaper business is having tough times right now, but you know, I got to work for a national paper with a national platform. I was there for 27 years. I wrote the sports column for a good chunk of that, going back to 1989, and you felt like a lot of the most important people in the country were reading you every morning. It was a great experience. It is still a great newspaper. And it was an incredibly valuable part of my life. It's where I learned how to do the job.
What's your approach to covering stories?
Well, I think there are different kinds of stories. There are different kinds of stories in sports. Some of them are human stories, profiles, trying to get to know people, trying to tell their stories. There are issue stories where you're trying to get at a larger issue through sport. A lot of the time we do that. And then there's who won and who lost. And the fantasy of. The fantasy that we all partake in as sports fans, which is getting wrapped up in your team and being a fan. I've always tried to kind of straddle that line, to bring hard news instincts to sports when I could, but to never kind of lose sight of the fact that fans care and are passionate about it. And I try not to lose the fan part inside of me.
All right. Well, speaking of stories, then, what was your favorite story, and what was your favorite athlete to cover?
Well, it's probably the same thing. They're probably the same thing because, I had a chance to write about Muhammad Ali, not during his career. I'm not quite old enough for that, but certainly after his career, I interviewed him a couple of times, and I took my kids to see him once and wrote a story about that. So, that's a very sentimental story for me, and just the chance to touch on the story of Ali. I wrote a book about him later on as well. He's the most important athlete of the 20th century, one of the most important figures of the 20th century, and I just felt very lucky to have a chance to be in his orbit for a little while.
All right, Stephen. I have the pleasure every week to talking with you and getting your insight on all types of different topics, but it was nice to get the insight on the man behind those beautiful suits, and we'll see you next week, man.
Thanks, Wilder.